When I married Daniel, I thought I was stepping into the second act of a calm, predictable life. He was older than me by nearly 10 years, a man of routines and principles. He had already lived through a first marriage that gave him a son, Ethan, now on the cusp of manhood at 20. I entered that world cautiously, not as a replacement mother, but as a companion who was expected to respect boundaries while quietly knitting the household together. At first, it worked. Daniel was attentive, steady in his affections, but as months turned into years, his presence faded into a pattern of long hours at work and distracted evenings at home. He loved me, yes, but in that comfortable, unchanging way a man loves his armchair, familiar, unexamined, always there. I craved more, not luxury or gifts, but the feeling of being seen, wanted, chosen again and again. Ethan, meanwhile, was polite to me, reserved but not hostile. We coexisted with a kind of mutual politeness. He kept to his studies, his room, his headphones. I told myself he was just shy, though sometimes I caught glimmers of something unspoken in the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. I never allowed myself to wonder what it meant. One evening, when the house was unusually quiet, I carried a basket of laundry down the hall. Daniel had left for another late-night meeting, and the silence of the place pressed against my ears. As I passed Ethan's door, slightly ajar, I heard a sound, a low, uneven rhythm that made me pause. Curiosity, innocent at first, pulled me to glance through the narrow slit. What I saw rooted me to the floor. Ethan was sprawled on his bed, sheets tangled, his hand moving urgently between his legs. His eyes were closed, his lips parted with a soft, involuntary groan. For a heartbeat, I didn't breathe. I felt the air catch in my chest, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something else I dared not name. I should have walked away. I should have tightened my grip on the laundry basket and pretended nothing had happened. But I stood there longer than I should have, heat flooding my face, my mind racing with questions I had no right to ask. How long had he been doing this alone, in silence, in a house where no one seemed to notice him? Suddenly, the floor creaked beneath me. Ethan's eyes snapped open, locking onto mine in an instant of horror. The laundry basket nearly slipped from my arms. We froze, both caught in a moment neither of us could erase. His cheeks flamed red, and he yanked the sheet over himself, muttering something incoherent. I stepped back, my heart thundering. I'm sorry, I stammered, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. I turned away quickly, but the image clung to me like smoke, impossible to wave off. In my own room, I set the laundry down with trembling hands and pressed my palms against my face. Why hadn't I left sooner? Why had I looked at all? The questions burned, but underneath them lay something more dangerous, an ache I hadn't felt in years. The memory of his flushed skin, his raw vulnerability, it unsettled me because it struck too close to my own hidden hunger. For months, I had been pretending my loneliness was manageable, that Daniel's distance was a phase. But seeing Ethan alone like that, desperate and unguarded, peeled away my illusions. I paced the room, torn between shame and a reckless, unfamiliar urge. I told myself I had to restore boundaries, to forget what I'd seen. Yet my mind refused to let go, circling back to the look in Ethan's eyes when he realized I was there. Not just fear, something else shimmered in that gaze. Hours later, when Daniel returned and kissed me absently before heading to bed, I lay awake in silence, my body restless, my thoughts consumed. A single, dangerous idea had taken root: maybe Ethan wasn't the only one left starving in this house. And once that thought lodged itself inside me, I knew, tomorrow, I would not pretend. The next morning, the house felt strangely different, as though the air itself carried the memory of last night's discovery. I avoided Ethan at breakfast, keeping my eyes on my coffee cup while Daniel scrolled through his phone. Nothing outwardly had changed, but inside me, something restless pulsed. I could not unsee what I had seen. When Daniel left for work, the silence fell again, thick and expectant. I tried to bury myself in chores, folding laundry, wiping counters, even reorganizing shelves that didn't need it. But every action brought me back to that moment in the hallway, to Ethan's startled gaze. I told myself I would not bring it up, that the decent thing was to let him forget it ever happened. Yet by late afternoon, I found myself walking toward his room with no plan other than to face the tension directly. His door was closed this time. I knocked lightly. "Ethan, can I come in?" There was a pause, then his voice, tight with hesitation, "Yeah." I stepped inside, and he looked up from his desk where a half-finished assignment glowed on his laptop screen. He tried to mask his unease, but the stiffness in his posture betrayed him. "I wanted to talk," I said softly. "About last night." His ears turned crimson, and he shut the laptop as if to shield himself. "You weren't supposed to see that," he muttered. "I know," I replied quickly, keeping my tone gentle. "I didn't mean to, but I don't want you to feel ashamed. You're not doing anything wrong." He glanced at me, uncertain. It was embarrassing. I sat on the edge of his bed, careful to keep space between us. "Ethan, listen to me. Everyone needs release. Everyone gets lonely sometimes. My words faltered, because I was treading a line too fine to name. "I only want you to know you don't have to hide from me." He studied me, his eyes darker than I remembered, searching for the truth in my face. "You won't tell Dad?" The question cut deeper than I expected. The thought of Daniel, oblivious, distant Daniel, felt like an intrusion in this private storm. "No," I said firmly. "This stays between us." Something in him relaxed, though his shoulders were still tight. "Thanks," he whispered. A silence stretched, heavy but not hostile. I noticed how grown he looked in that moment, the strong line of his jaw, the man he was becoming. He wasn't the boy I had cautiously tiptoed around when I first entered this family. And maybe that was what unsettled me most. I could no longer pretend to see him only as Daniel's son. I reached out without thinking, laying a hand on his shoulder. The gesture was meant to reassure, but the warmth of his skin lingered beneath my palm longer than it should have. He didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned almost imperceptibly closer. My pulse quickened. "You've been carrying a lot on your own," I murmured. "You shouldn't have to." His gaze locked with mine, and for a suspended second, the room seemed to tilt. His eyes weren't pleading, they were daring, testing whether I would pull away or stay. Realization jolted me, and I withdrew my hand quickly, standing up as though burned. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," I said, my voice unsteady. Ethan's lips parted as if to say more, but he stopped himself, nodding instead. "I'm fine." I left the room before my composure crumbled, closing the door softly behind me. My hands shook as I pressed them to my chest, feeling the wild hammer of my heartbeat. What had I been about to do? Why had I allowed that silence to stretch so far, to say more than words could? In the kitchen, I gripped the counter and whispered to myself, "Enough. This can't happen again." But deep inside, I knew I was lying. That lingering heat, that unspoken current between us, it wasn't gone. It was waiting, and as I washed my hands under cold water, I realized something dangerous. The next time, I might not have the strength to step back. The days that followed passed in a haze of unease. Outwardly, everything appeared the same. Daniel buried in his office work, Ethan moving between classes and his room, me tending to the house as if nothing had shifted. Yet underneath, the air carried a silent electricity. I caught Ethan watching me at odd moments, over dinner, across the living room, even in the reflection of the hallway mirror. Each glance lingered a little too long, and I was guilty of returning them when I thought Daniel wasn't looking. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel announced he was leaving for a weekend conference. He packed quickly, kissed me with the distracted affection I had grown used to, and left without noticing the undercurrent that simmered in the house. The sound of his car fading down the street left a hollow silence in its wake. Ethan was in the kitchen when I walked in. He looked up from a glass of water, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Something tightened in my chest, a recognition that we were alone, truly alone, for the first time since that night. "You okay?" I asked, my voice quieter than intended. He set the glass down, studying me carefully. "Are you?" The question caught me off guard. I forced a smile. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because you've been different." His eyes didn't waver. "Ever since that night." I opened my mouth to deny it, but the lie dried on my tongue. Instead, I sank into a chair, the weight of my own silence pressing down. "Maybe I have," I admitted. He moved closer, resting his hands on the back of the chair across from me. "Can I tell you something?" I nodded. "I used to think about you," he said, voice low but steady. "Even before that night. I know I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop." The words struck me like a confession in church, raw, dangerous, but liberating. My heart pounded. "Ethan, I don't mean to make you uncomfortable," he cut in. I see how Dad treats you. Like you're invisible. And I can't stand it." I looked away, but the truth of his words pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. Daniel's neglect had become a wound I disguised with chores and smiles. Hearing Ethan speak it aloud made it throb painfully. "I shouldn't feel this way," I whispered. "Neither should I," he replied. The silence between us thickened, but it was no longer awkward, it was charged. When he walked around the table and stood before me, I didn't move. His hand hovered near mine, waiting. I let him take it. His fingers were warm, hesitant at first, then firmer as I didn't pull away. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths as I met his gaze. He wasn't a boy anymore, he was a man, and in that moment I saw him not as Daniel's son, but as someone who wanted me, who truly saw me. When he leaned closer, I felt the brush of his breath before his lips touched mine. The kiss was tentative, trembling, yet it unraveled something deep inside me. My hands found his shoulders, pulling him closer even as guilt whispered in my ear. I broke away, breathless. "We can't." "But you want to," he said softly, not as a question but as a truth. I closed my eyes, fighting the storm inside me. Every principle I thought unshakable wavered under the weight of longing. Daniel had left me starved. Ethan was offering what I had denied myself for too long. When his arms circled me, I didn't resist. I let the warmth of his body against mine answer for me. The dam had cracked, and the water rushed through, impossible to hold back. Later, lying in the quiet aftermath, I stared at the ceiling, my body trembling with equal parts satisfaction and dread. Ethan's head rested against my shoulder, his breath steady, content. But my mind churned. The line we had crossed could never be erased. I knew the cost would come, sooner or later. Yet in that moment, wrapped in his embrace, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. The morning light crept into the room like an unwelcome witness. I stirred awake, disoriented, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Then I felt the weight of Ethan's arm draped across me, and memory returned in a rush, the kiss, the embrace, the surrender I swore I would never allow. I slipped carefully from his side, wrapping myself in the thin blanket, as if fabric could shield me from the enormity of what we had done. My reflection in the mirror startled me, hair disheveled, lips swollen, eyes that looked both alive and guilty. It was as though I had borrowed another woman's face for the night and now struggled to recognize it. Behind me, Ethan stirred. "You're leaving already?" His voice was still thick with sleep. I whispered. "We shouldn't have." "Don't say it," he interrupted, sitting up. "Don't act like it meant nothing." I turned to face him, my chest tight. "It didn't mean nothing. That's the problem." His eyes softened, but they also burned with determination. "I don't regret it." I wished I could say the same aloud. But regret wasn't the right word, either. What I felt was more complicated, a collision of desire and fear, of being seen and being trapped. Later, I made breakfast as though it were any other day. The clatter of dishes, the smell of toast, the hum of the refrigerator, all painfully normal. Ethan sat across from me, and we exchanged glances heavy with the unspoken. We were co-conspirators now, bound by a secret that could unravel everything if exposed. When Daniel returned that evening, the house reverted to its old rhythm. He kissed my cheek absently, asked about the bills, and spoke of his meetings. His obliviousness gnawed at me. If he looked closer, even for a moment, would he see the crack beneath the surface? Would he smell the guilt clinging to me like perfume? Ethan was quiet at dinner, answering Daniel's questions politely, but every time his eyes brushed mine, my pulse quickened. I lowered my gaze, pretending to focus on my plate. That night, lying beside my husband, I stared into the darkness, wide awake. Daniel's steady breathing filled the silence, but it felt like a wall between us. I thought of Ethan in the next room, equally sleepless perhaps, carrying the same restless weight. My mind churned with possibilities. Should I end this before it began, lock it away as a single lapse of judgment? Or had I already crossed too far, tethered now to a desire that refused to be buried? I imagined confessing to Daniel, imagined the fury, the betrayal etched across his face. But even in that cruel vision, I saw no regret in myself, only shame for being caught. The truth was harder to admit. Ethan had given me something Daniel hadn't in years. Not just touch, but attention, hunger, the raw affirmation of being wanted. And wasn't that human? To crave closeness, to reach for warmth in the cold, to fill an emptiness when it threatens to hollow you out. As the days turned into weeks, the secret became part of me. Some evenings, Ethan and I exchanged nothing more than a lingering glance. Other times, when Daniel was away, we gave into what was already inevitable. Each time, the guilt and the desire grew in equal measure. I told myself we were only surviving, two lonely souls reaching for each other in a house built on silence. But survival has a cost, and I knew ours would come due. Still, when I looked at Ethan, the way he looked at me, not as a shadow or an afterthought, but as if I were central, vital, I felt more alive than I had in years. Perhaps one day, the secret would unravel. Perhaps Daniel would discover the truth, and the fragile life we had built would collapse. But that was a fear for tomorrow. Tonight, as I sat in the quiet after everyone had gone to bed, I admitted the truth I had been circling since that first accidental glimpse. I intervened not to save Ethan, but to save myself. And in doing so, I had crossed a line I could never uncross.